He threw out his pregnant black wife. 25 years later, a stranger helps him. Then he realizes it's his son. He threw his pregnant wife onto the streets like trash because she was poor, dark-skinned, and didn't fit his future. 25 years later, the son she raised in hunger and pain walked into a restaurant and came face to face with the man who abandoned them both. What happened next? No one saw it coming. Stay with this story, you won't forget it. He threw out his pregnant wife for a secretary, but life was watching. The tiny apartment in Surrey had once held laughter, cheap candles, and two big dreams wrapped inside smaller lives. But tonight, the air hung heavy. Not with heat, but something colder, something final. Chinelo stood at the edge of their second-hand couch, folding soft blue baby clothes with quiet tenderness. The fabric smelled of soap and hope. Her belly, swollen with their first child, shifted as the baby kicked gently, like he, too, was waiting for something. Michael stood by the window, dressed in a freshly ironed shirt and cufflinks he didn't own just months ago. His voice came flat, hollow. "I want a divorce." The words hit her like a steel gate slamming shut. She blinked. The tiny socks slipped from her hands to the floor. "Michael, what are you saying? I found someone else. Her name's Cynthia. She's my secretary. She understands where I'm going. She fits my future." He said it like he was reading a memo. No tremor, no regret, just indifference. Chinelo stared at him, lost. "Michael, I'm pregnant. This is your child." He sighed and turned his gaze away, jaw tightening. That child would be better off without the weight of your background. Cynthia is educated, polished. Her children will have a better chance, a better pedigree. The cruelty sliced through her like glass. Her knees buckled. She fell at his feet, gripping the hem of his trousers. "Please, don't do this. Don't do this to our child." His leg twitched as if her touch disgusted him. "Pack your things. I want you gone before morning." No thunder rolled, no neighbors heard, just silence. That quiet kind that screams through the soul. The kind that tells you love is dead. 5 years ago, Michael had been nothing. A junior banker eating fried yam and stew from the corner table of Mama Nkechai's canteen, where Chinelo worked double shifts as a waitress. She was always kind, always strong. He had followed her home one day under the weight of dusk and dust, holding her hand like it held his future. "We'll build something from nothing," he used to whisper. She believed him. She fed his dreams. Took night classes just to understand his world. Sewed his shirts, cheered his wins, and prayed over his failures. Now, standing in this same apartment she had once made a home, all of that had turned to ash. That night, Michael walked past her as she sobbed on the floor. He stepped over the memories, over the mother of his unborn child, and never looked back. At dawn, Chinelo stood outside their apartment building. One small suitcase. One long dress. One child kicking inside her belly. No money, no family, no plan. Only the smell of Lagos exhaust in the morning air and the echo of a man's betrayal still bleeding from her soul. She did not cry again. She simply stepped into the street barefoot and disappeared into the crowd. Pregnant and alone, she wandered Lagos streets with nowhere to go. The streets of Lagos do not wait for the broken. Horns blare, smoke rises, and bodies move like a current, indifferent, unstoppable. Chinelo walked among them, invisible. Her feet dragged over cracked concrete and sun-baked dust. Her dress clung to her body, heavy with sweat and grief. One arm cradled her belly instinctively, not from pain, but from fear that something as fragile as her unborn child might slip away with one wrong step. She had no home, no one was waiting. Shadows stretched long as evening fell. Shop owners pulled down rusted shutters. Children ran after one another in the last light, and Chinelo kept walking. Each step was a question. "Where will we sleep tonight, my child?" The baby kicked, soft but sure, a small answer. A reminder she was not alone. Her stomach growled, but pride kept her from begging. Even when she passed Suya stands and the scent of grilled meat filled her lungs. She held her head high until her legs began to tremble beneath her. She found a quiet corner near an abandoned building in Ojo. A cracked stairwell led to a narrow space beneath the concrete awning. It was just wide enough to lie down. She sat down slowly. Her ankles were swollen, her back ached. The sky above turned dark, heavy with clouds, and the first drops of rain tapped the sidewalk like fingers drumming on a coffin. She pressed her hands to her belly. "I'm sorry. I should have known better than to trust someone like him." The baby shifted. "No, no, you don't deserve this." She curled her body around her belly as the wind picked up and rain began to fall harder. Her voice was a whisper, soaked in pain but burning with something deeper. "You will not suffer for your father's choices. I swear to you, my son, I will not let this world break us." Tears ran down her face, mixing with the rain as the night swallowed the streets. In the darkness, buses roared past. Generators hummed. Somewhere people danced. Somewhere else people prayed. And under the broken ledge of a forgotten stairwell, a black woman, young, homeless, pregnant, clutched her stomach like a shield and made a promise to a child who had not yet seen the sun. The concrete was cold against her skin, but her spirit stayed warm. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she still believed. She believed that even a woman thrown out like trash could raise a king. A pregnant girl collapsed from hunger. Then an old woman stepped in. The morning sun was unforgiving, casting gold over the dirt and heat rising off Ogudu Market like steam from boiling sorrow. Life moved fast here, sellers shouting prices, keek horns blaring, children darting between legs, and fruit flies dancing over bananas too ripe to wait another day. Chinelo stood at the edge of it all, dazed. Her body leaned slightly to the left from exhaustion. Her dress, once cream-colored, was now a patchwork of sweat and Lagos dust. The baby inside her shifted. Her lips were cracked. Her stomach ached in long, hollow waves. She hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. As she stepped forward, her vision blurred. The sounds of the market twisted into a dull hum. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the warm concrete beside a wooden fruit table stacked with oranges, pineapples, and pawpaw. A pair of brown, worn sandals stopped beside her face. "Child, are you trying to die here? You look ready to fall into the earth." The voice was deep, weathered, and slow, like it had carried pain across many seasons. Chinelo blinked up at the face above her. A dark-skinned woman in her late 60s maybe, with a white wrapper tied firm at her waist, and a faded jewel wrapped like a crown. Her eyes were sharp and kind, with the kind of knowing that could break you or carry you. I'm fine. I just need to rest. Rest, look at you. When last did you eat?" The woman didn't wait for an answer. She turned, picked up a ripe banana from her stall, and handed it to Chinelo without a word. "Eat, then talk." Chinelo stared at the banana, then back at her. "Please, I don't have." "I said eat, child. I'm not selling, I'm helping." Her fingers shook as she peeled it, and in seconds it was gone. The woman's eyes softened. "Name? Chinelo. I have no place to stay. I'm looking for work. I can sweep, clean, sell, anything." The woman studied her for a long moment. She looked past the dust, past the cracked lips and sunken cheeks, and saw something else. "Come here tomorrow at dawn. I'll give you a tray of fruit. Sell them near the post office. Bring back my money. Whatever is left, you keep." Chinelo's eyes filled before she could stop them. "Why are you helping me?" "Because 30 years ago nobody helped me. I was thrown out too, no child, no hope, but I survived. And now when I see that same fire in someone's eyes, I help." She reached out a firm, dry hand. "I'm Mama Adoni. And you, girl, you're not broken, you're just beginning." That was the moment something shifted, not in the world. The world kept rushing, shouting, and buying. But inside Chinalo, the ache of being unwanted met the warmth of a stranger's kindness. And in that space between a banana and a name, a new story began to take root, not with pity, but with partnership. Two women, one older, one younger, one weathered by storms, the other just entering the rain. And both, abandoned in different times, found in each other something worth holding on to. He left her with nothing, but she fought for everything with bare hands. The Lagos sun shows no mercy. It burns the poor twice, once on their skin and once in their spirit. But Chinalo kept walking. Each morning before dawn, she tied a wrapper around her belly and balanced a wooden tray of fruit on her head. Bananas, oranges, groundnuts, whatever Mama Adney had for her that day. She moved through crowded streets like a shadow with fire in her eyes. Her feet were blistered, ankles swollen, but she never stopped. The baby in her belly kicked as she called out to strangers. Fresh oranges here, sweet bananas. Help a sister feed her child. Some people looked away. Some gave coins out of pity. Others handed her folded bills with quiet respect, but Chinalo never begged. She worked. At midday, she would crouch under a cement overhang, wipe sweat from her brow, drink warm sachet water, and whisper to the life inside her. "We're going to make it, my love. I don't know how yet, but we will." Her belly grew. Her arms grew stronger too. Her back ached, but her posture never collapsed. Not even when the rain caught her mid-sail or when an arrogant man tried to touch her without permission. One day, Mama Adney found her collapsed near the market, cramping hard. "You need rest, child. You can't keep selling like this." Chinalo's voice cracked. "If I stop, we don't eat." Mama's jaw tightened. She wrapped an arm around the girl. "You'll stay with me. My room is small, but so is every beginning." That night, Chinalo slept under a roof again. It wasn't luxury. It was mercy. And mercy was enough. Weeks passed. Her due date drew close. One evening, as the wind howled through broken windows and the smell of boiled plantain filled the room, her water broke. "Mama, it's time." Mama Adney didn't flinch. She boiled water, laid down cloths, held Chinalo's hand as pain ripped through her. "Push, child, don't be afraid, you were made for this." Sweat dripped down Chinalo's face. Her cries echoed off the tin roof. Her body shook, torn between agony and something sacred. And then one final cry, a new cry. Mama Adney held the tiny boy in her hands, still slick with birth, trembling but alive. "He's beautiful, strong lungs too. What will you name him?" Chinalo, tears streaming down her cheeks, looked at the baby resting on her chest. His skin was deep brown, his fists curled tight like he already knew the world would not be gentle. "Amici," she whispered. "It means the one who knows the way, the one who will do great things." In that moment, the storm outside softened. The city kept rushing. Cars kept honking. But inside that small room, a mother warrior held her child to her chest like a shield against the world. She had nothing, no husband, no money, no safety net, but she had strength. And now she had Amici. Her baby was dying, and only a stranger's sacrifice could save him. The morning started like any other. The air in Lagos was thick with heat, the kind that clings to your skin and makes the concrete sweat. Chinalo had just returned from hawking fruits, her back sore, blouse damp, and coins jingling in a small pouch tied to her wrapper. Inside the one-room shelter, baby Amma was unusually quiet. She leaned over his mat. "Amma, my sunshine, wake up." His eyes fluttered but didn't hold her gaze. His body was hot, too hot. Chinalo touched his forehead and her fingers recoiled. The fever was like fire trapped under his skin. "Mama, he's burning." Mama Adney rushed in from the stall outside. Her face turned grave the second she touched the child's cheek. "This is not just fever. You need to take him to the hospital. Now." By the time they reached Lagos University Teaching Hospital, Amma was no longer crying. He only whimpered, a low, frightening sound like he didn't have the strength to scream anymore. A nurse took him from her arms. Minutes felt like hours. Then came the doctor. It's meningitis. He needs immediate treatment. IV antibiotics, fluids, observation. If untreated, he could lose hearing, or worse. Chinelo stood up fast. What do I need to do? The doctor didn't blink. The cost is 150,000 naira. Up front, her heart dropped. She had saved, not much, but she had tried. She counted out 75,000 naira from every small hustle, every fruit sold, every cloth washed. Her hands trembled as she laid the money on the counter. This is all I have. It's not enough. You'll need to settle the balance or discharge him. She didn't respond. She just sank to the hospital floor, her back pressed against the white wall, her knees pulled to her chest as if making herself smaller might make the pain easier to carry. Mama Adni sat beside her without a word. For a long while, neither woman spoke. Then Mama pulled something from her handbag, a folded cloth pouch. These are my savings, all of it. Chinelo looked up in shock. No. Mama, this is your. Take it, that boy is my grandson. Blood does not define family. Love does. Tears rolled down Chinelo's cheeks as she took the bundle. Why are you doing this for me? Because when I had no one came. And I swore if I ever saw another woman on the edge, I wouldn't turn away. You gave me a reason to keep that promise. They handed the payment to the hospital clerk. Amma was moved into treatment. Machines beeped, nurses moved fast, and time held its breath. 2 days passed in restless prayer and whispered lullabies. Chinelo never left his side. She held his hand through the IV, wiped his forehead, and sang to him even when her voice cracked. On the third morning, Amma opened his eyes. The fever broke. He reached for her finger, and in that moment nothing else in the world mattered. Later that night, Chinelo sat on the hospital bench watching her son sleep. She turned to Mama Adoni. How do I repay you? You already did, child. You trusted me. That's more than I ever got from anyone in my own storm. Chinelo looked down at her son. I will never let the world decide what kind of mother I am. I will never again be powerless when he needs me. She didn't know how, not yet, but she would rise. She had to, because now she knew the cost of falling. And someone had already paid it for her. She sold fruit with a baby on her back, then built a food empire. Lagos doesn't give miracles, it forces you to become one. Chinelo stood outside a construction site on Victoria Island, the heat baking her scalp beneath her head wrap. Her tray of fruits balanced steady, but her eyes had moved beyond bananas and oranges. She was watching the workers. They were men, tired, loud, sweating through shirts, grumbling between bites of cold, tasteless rice served in plastic bags. Some didn't eat at all. One spat his food out and threw it in a nearby bin. This food no punishment, one of them muttered. Chinelo looked down at her son, now a toddler strapped to her back. Amma's small hand tapped her shoulder softly, his breathing even. She whispered to herself, "We can do better than this." The next day she returned, not with fruit, but with courage, firewood, and a small cooler filled with jollof rice, grilled chicken, and fried plantains. She approached the site manager, a wide-shouldered Yoruba man wearing dark sunglasses and suspicion on his face. "What do you want?" "Sir, my name is Chinelo. I cook. I want to feed your men. One try." "If they don't love it, you don't pay me." He tilted his head. "You want to feed 50 grown men with what? A cooler. Let me serve lunch today, just today. I'm not asking for anything free." He folded his arms, half amused, half curious. "All right, let's see what you've got." That afternoon, the scent of spicy rice and hot oil drifted through the construction site like a signal fire. The workers dropped their tools and circled around her table. Some took a bite and widened their eyes. "No woman cook this." Chai, this jollof no war, she smiled as plates emptied. One man came back for thirds. The site manager watched it all, arms still folded but his mouth chewing. Come back tomorrow, he finally said, and bring more. That was the beginning. Word spread fast. Within 2 weeks, she had contracts at 3 sites. She woke before dawn to cook, carrying her pots in keek naps, sometimes with Amma tied to her back, sometimes asleep beside the coal stove. She cooked with everything she had, smoke in her eyes, prayer in her mouth, sweat in every spoonful. Soon she hired 2 other women, then 4. She rented a small space near the market, installed her first iron stove, and called it what it was, a kitchen of survival. Amma, now 5, helped after school, handing out plates, counting money, telling every customer thank you with pride. Mama, why do you feed the children who can't pay? Because we were hungry once too, my son. And success means lifting others, not stepping over them. The business grew not just from taste, but from trust. Her food was clean, her hands honest, her name known. By the end of that year, Chinalo no longer walked the streets to sell. People came to her. The fire in her belly had given her a son, but the fire in her spirit had given them both a future. He threw away his pregnant wife. Now he was begging on the street. The city had changed, but it hadn't softened. Lagos still pulsed with ambition and unforgiving heat. Michael Ockhafer stepped out of Kirakiri prison with nothing but the clothes on his back and the weight of 8 long years clinging to his bones. His face was thinner, his eyes hollow, his walk slower. The man who once wore tailored suits now begged with cracked palms and broken pride. His fall had been quiet but brutal. Cynthia, the secretary he left his wife for, had turned out to be far more calculating than he ever imagined. When she caught the attention of a billionaire oil executive, she didn't hesitate. She reported Michael to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, handing them all the evidence of the embezzlement he had foolishly carried out to fund her lavish taste. He had laughed at Chinalo's simplicity once. Now he would have given anything for a plate of her food. Nobody came for him. His friends vanished. His family distanced themselves. Cynthia disappeared with the last of his stolen money and left him with prison bars and headlines. Now 51, but looking 70, Michael drifted through the streets of Lagos like a forgotten ghost. One sweltering Thursday afternoon, he sat slumped near a building wall in Victoria Island, head bowed, hands cupped. His breath wheezed in his chest, stomach cramping from hunger. A pair of polished shoes stopped in front of him. "Sir, are you hungry?" Michael lifted his head. Standing above him was a young man in a fitted shirt, briefcase in hand, kindness in his voice. He looked successful, confident, but something about him also felt familiar. "Too familiar. Please, anything you can spare, come with me. I'll buy you a proper meal." The man helped him up gently. Michael's knees nearly gave out. He limped beside the stranger, too weak to ask questions, too hungry to think. They entered a restaurant, bright sign, lively crowd. The smell of jollof rice, pepper soup, and fried plantain filled the air. The Golden Pot. Michael froze at the name. He had heard whispers about it, even in prison. A small business started by a woman once left for dead. A single mother who fed half the city. His mouth dried. Inside, behind the counter, a woman looked up. Her eyes locked on his. Time unraveled. Chinalo, she didn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the cash register. Michael's lips parted, but no sound came out. The young man turned to her. "Mama, can we get something hot for this man? He looks like he hasn't eaten in days." Chinalo stared, silent. Michael's voice cracked. Is this my son?" The young man's eyes widened. "You." He looked back at Chinalo. "Mama, is this him?" She nodded slowly. Amma's hands curled into fists. "You threw her out, pregnant, on the street. And now you sit here eating her food?" Michael tried to speak. Please, I was a fool. I lost everything. Amma's voice was cold. You lost me. He turned, stormed out of the restaurant. Michael stood frozen, staring at the empty space where his son had stood. A son he never held, never named, never cared for. Chinelo came out moments later with a small plate. She placed it beside him. Eat. Michael kept his eyes on the ground. I don't deserve your kindness. I didn't do it for you. I did it for him, so he would see what forgiveness looks like even when it isn't earned. He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. You threw me out like trash, Michael, and now you sit in the empire built by what you threw away. She turned and walked back inside. Michael remained on the steps, plate in lap, food untouched. The taste of regret had already filled his mouth. He walked into her restaurant and faced the son he abandoned. The restaurant buzzed with evening life. Plates clattered, steam rose from bowls of egusi soup, and the smell of smoked fish danced in the air. The golden pot was full, warm, alive. Then the door opened. Michael stepped in slowly, like a shadow returning to a place it had fled from. His clothes were worn. His eyes searched the space until they landed on her. Chinelo stood behind the counter, hands busy with receipts, but her body froze when she saw him. She knew. It had been 25 years, but pain doesn't forget a face. Amma stood beside the register, helping with closing numbers. He followed his mother's gaze, then looked at the man walking toward them. He tilted his head. Mama, is everything okay? Chinelo's lips parted. That's your father. The room vanished. Amma took one step back, chest rising, fists clenching. You're the man who left us. Michael opened his mouth, but no words came out. You left my mother pregnant. You threw her on the street so you could chase some secretary and your dreams of being important. Son, please. Don't call me that. The words cut like blades. You don't get to call me son. You gave that up before I was even born. Michael turned to Chinelo. I was wrong. I was blind, and I paid for it. I lost everything. Chinelo's voice was calm, steady. No, Michael, you didn't lose everything. You gave it away. You gave up a woman who would have stood with you through fire. You gave up a child who only needed your presence. And for what? A dream that crumbled. Amma stepped forward, tears burning in his eyes. You know what I remember, Baba? Nothing, because you were never there when I had my first fever, when I scraped my knee, when I needed someone to tell me I mattered. You were not there. You don't exist in my childhood. Only the pain you left behind does. Michael's knees buckled. He sank into a chair. I've thought of you every day. I see what I missed, what I destroyed. Please, I don't expect your love. Just your forgiveness. Amma shook his head. Forgiveness isn't a right, it's a choice, and I'm not ready to make that choice. He walked out of the restaurant, the door slamming behind him like a final sentence. Later that night, Amma sat in the living room, arms crossed, jaw locked. Chinelo sat beside him. Mama Adney across from him, her cane resting beside her feet. My son, Chinelo said gently, you don't have to forgive him tonight, but don't let your anger write the story of your future. Mama Adney nodded slowly. I carried bitterness for years, and it made my heart heavy. Not forgiving someone doesn't punish them, it punishes you. But what he did, Amma whispered, what he took from us. And look what we built anyway, Chinelo said. Look who you are. Look who we became. Silence settled in the room. Amma leaned back, eyes stinging, chest tight. He doesn't deserve peace. No, Mama said, but you do. And sometimes peace is something you choose not because they earned it, but because you refuse to carry what they left behind. Amma said nothing more that night, but something inside him began to soften, just enough to breathe, just enough to imagine that maybe healing didn't have to wait forever. He didn't deserve forgiveness, but his son refused to stay bitter. 3 days passed. The city moved on, but inside Amma something stayed stuck, a war between justice and peace. He sat alone on a rooftop. the Lagos skyline behind him, orange light bleeding across the sky. He stared at his hands, the same hands that once carried trays of rice with his mother, that once reached for love from someone who never came. A knock came at the door behind him. It was Chinalo. She sat beside him without a word. She didn't press, didn't prod, just sat. Amma finally spoke. "I want to hate him. I do. You don't have to love him," Chinalo said softly. "But hating him, it won't free you either." He turned toward her. "Did you forgive him? Years ago, not for him, for me." "Forgiveness was my way of saying you don't get to own my future." Amma nodded, eyes wet. The next morning, he found Michael in the same spot where they'd first met. A concrete step outside the golden pot, head bowed, hands trembling. Michael looked up as Amma approached, startled. "I didn't expect." Amma held out a card. "This is a place that helps former inmates. You'll get training, housing, a path, if you want it." Michael's hands shook as he took it. "Does this mean you forgive me?" "I forgive you, but not because you deserve it. I forgive you because I'm done letting what you did shape who I am." Michael looked at him with disbelief. "I don't expect anything more. And you shouldn't." Amma stood up, his voice firm. "You don't get a second chance at fatherhood. But you can still become someone decent. Don't waste this." Then he walked away. 5 years passed. The Golden Pot was now 3 restaurants strong, each one filled with the smell of Chinalo's legacy. Hot food, warm hearts, and stories whispered over jollof rice and egusi. On Sunday evenings, the original restaurant buzzed with life. Amma sat with his wife, Adai, and their 2 children. Chinalo poured pepper soup into bowls. Mama Adney told stories that made the kids laugh until they cried. And in the corner near the doorway, Michael sat quietly. He didn't speak much. He worked now modest job, steady routine. He had finished the program Amma gave him, found a room, paid his rent. Sometimes he sent letters. Sometimes Amma replied, but never with expectation. That Sunday, he watched from his corner as Chinalo smiled at her grandchild as Amma lifted his daughter into the air. And he wept, not for what he had lost, but for what had survived without him. Because some stories don't end in perfect reconciliation. Sometimes, the truest happy ending is found not in returning to what was broken, but in building what no one believed could stand. Amma had chosen love over bitterness. And Chinalo, the girl once left barefoot on the streets, now ruled a table of generations, fed by fire, healed by mercy, and crowned with grace. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most never say sorry. And sometimes they do, but far too late. Yet this story reminds us that strength isn't always found in revenge, but in rising above what tried to break you. Chinalo didn't just survive, she built. Amma didn't just grow, he chose peace over bitterness. And Michael, though he lost everything, was offered one final gift, a chance to find redemption not through words but through change. Let this story be a quiet reminder that true power isn't in what you have, but in how you choose to love, forgive, and rebuild. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Black Unbreakable, and leave a comment below telling us what this story meant to you. And stay tuned, because in the next videos we'll uncover more real, powerful stories of Black lives. Stories of struggle, injustice, and yes, stories of unimaginable triumph. Stories that have been overlooked for far too long, but once heard, will stay with you forever. We can't wait to share them with you.